But this film, for people who are wondering, Hereditary is from 2017. I don't think I updated this. 2017? 2018. Okay, it's been a long time. And it is directed by Ari Aster, and it is about a grieving family is haunted by tragic and disturbing occurrences, which is an incredibly vague synopsis. Thank you, IMDb, because you're keeping all the deets to yourself. For that one, you're like, no, this is going to be in the secrets. And for... I think in the second watch, while wearing our media analysis glasses, like not just watching it for fun and for like a horror lover's sake, I didn't love it as much. Like it wasn't like as exciting. I in the second watch, Celeste, I also like started to notice more of the cinematography and more of the intentionality with like art direction. There's like, I'm like still like, I want it. It's like there's like a sculpture where it's like the house on the lawn, and under it is like underground, but there's houses kind of stacked on top of each other, like in ground. Like it's supposed to look like you're built upon the remnants of other houses. Like, but it's just a piece that's just there. Like you see it a few times because there's houses throughout the whole thing, because it's all about, don't throw rocks in glass houses, all that stuff. And like, I'm in love with that. But I was definitely like, it's so blue and there's pops of things. I was like, because I spend a lot more, like, I know what's happening. So I'm not so much like looking for like the jump scares and all, or just like the shock value of things. Instead, I was looking and being like, oh, this is like, catching the little things in the corners, or just like appreciating the color coding of everything. It's all blue. It's so blue all the time, unless they're evil and then they're wearing red. And so it was like, those things were really nice. And even catching, like, I totally miss the like school conversation, which is like, whenever there's a school and there's a lecture happening, like you need to pay attention because they're telling you the plot of the film, like always. So I was like, oh, so this time I was listening to the school conversation. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, you're doing that too. So I enjoyed that. We're asking two core questions in this series. One is, does it appropriately represent the horrors of mental illness? And does it inspire empathy or compassion towards an individual mental illness? And so I think this film wants you to actively fear hereditary mental illnesses. If it wants to put people into the shoes of anyone who is afraid of inheriting a mental illness, having already survived or experienced a loved one kind of lost. Like there's certain terminology that's used in this film, like Annie says that her mom, when her mother's mind was polluted, she was like this, and when her mind wasn't polluted, she was the most loving woman in the world. So there's definitely like this, she has this residual feeling about the mental illness, and there's a constant like looming threat that's coming for you, and this film really wants you to feel that. And so there's a part of that where I'm like, okay, but for someone who's on the outside to like kind of understand and empathize what that fear can feel like and how it can spiral out of control, and feel like it's out of your hands. Yes, for anyone who might have that already, it's probably really triggering and worse. Like, watching that and being like, oh, now I feel guilty if I do want to have a family, because you're just solidifying all of the fears that I already had about doing that. So I don't feel like it necessarily inspires empathy and compassion towards individuals with mental illness, but it does inspire people to kind of maybe realize that it is a real fear.
So for me, the feelings that I have about this film in particular is it's interesting because the way that you guys are approaching this, because this to me isn't necessarily a movie that, while it does deal with mental illness, I feel like it's much more of a journey through a character going through grief and kind of the grief process. But, as the film kind of progresses and the more that Annie ends up kind of finding out more and more about her mother and kind of about the sickness that she has, and it's interesting to kind of see how she reacts and responds to everything. And I don't necessarily know if I've actually looked at it the way that you guys are looking at it. So I think this is kind of be one of those conversations where I'm going to be learning a lot from you guys, and then kind of going off of the things that you guys said, because you guys have a really interesting way of looking at films a lot differently than I do, and vice versa. I think that's why our brands work really well together.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think, and that's a good point, that it is about grief, because it definitely is.
Yeah, that's an element I would like totally left out of my thoughts. So it's good. It's a good realization.
Yeah. And because it's also like
real.
how you approach or digest like your family's mental illness too, and just like and kind of reconciling the fact that her mother was two people to her, right? Like she even says it, like there are times where she's not her mother, she was somebody else. And I think like, yeah, like when she said she had like the second kid, she was like that she wasn't even my mother then, and so she wasn't in my life, that kind of thing. I think what I got from the second watching was really this kind of like you're doomed to repeat the same mistakes, like history, because throughout the film we kind of see Annie slowly becoming her mother. Like she starts to do the things her mother did, and her family starts to do the things that her family did that we hear from that little story. She goes from like lingering over the diorama of her mother lingering in the doorway to herself lingering in the doorway of her son. Like it's like slowly she starts to do those things. She starts to have delusions herself, and it kind of exhibits certain tendencies that she probably would have seen her mother going through. And it was really interesting for me to see in this second view, to see all the ways that like she told us the one story about like what happened to her mom, and we see the little pictures from her art and then see her doing that. And I feel like one with that class discussion about Heracles and his doomed fate is that like no matter who you are, no matter how many signs and foreshadowing moments that you catch, because there are quite a lot in this film, that you're really doomed to fate. Like you will become your mother, and that's the ultimate fear that Annie's character had. And I found this article on Esquire called Hereditary Taps into the Unique Terror of Inherited Mental Illness by Emma Dibdin. And in it, Emma explains how Hereditary tapped into the mental strain of someone aware of the lingering possibility of mental illness, and how even when you're being precautious, it really only contributes to the fated ends, because you're just at it like you're going to have it, right? And so they say, you're constantly watching yourself for warning signs is draining and destabilizing, and can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is one way to read the increasingly surreal and horrifying events of Hereditary. In worrying that she will lose her mind, Annie drives herself insane. In worrying that her inherited madness will destroy her family, she destroys them herself. So it's like, even in trying to run away from those things, you're just, it's there. You're running into it. It's destiny. And I thought that was really interesting in that. And which is why, like, ultimately, like, when I'm watching this, is like, this is a horror film through and through. Like, it is a genuine, great horror film. And the goal of this horror is to provide a viewer a glimpse into a truly horrifying experience. And at the end of the day, it does bring light to the horrors of an impending doom of someone who's fearing they will inherit a mental illness. Like we discussed in our Undone episode, Alma was on the edge, like, from the beginning, because she knew that there was a chance that she could have schizophrenia, and that it's just a matter of time before it gets there. And so I think it does show like a flawed kind of stress family, like very honest stress family that just doesn't know how to handle each other. Like they've never had enough time, and they've never been like quote unquote normal enough to just deal with each other and accept each other, because they're always weary of like, is it you? Are you going to be the one who snaps? Are you the one who snaps? I can't even love you because I'm afraid I'm going to lose you, kind of thing. And for that, I feel like is very effective in providing that kind of outlook.
Yeah, I think it also like ties back to the whole not talking about familial history and mental illness. I think there's like because of the stigmas that exist within media and in society, that a lot of people feel like this anxiety to reveal that there is a history of mental illness in the family. And I think that there's like throughout the film, you kind of see this lack of honesty with it. Like she's talking about these things at the support group, but she's not having these conversations with her kids. She's not having these conversations with her husband. It's kind of something she kind of keeps to herself. Like she keeps it as a burden that she must carry and isn't like having what I would describe as like these kind of conversations that would offer a healing and preventative end to this inevitable potential threat, that you could really just like discuss openly, try to heal together with it. But there's so much that they kind of leave unsaid, even in the grieving process. You have that like really intense scene at dinner where they're all like not saying what they need to be saying, but are at the same time, where they're like, you're blaming me or you think it was my fault. And they both kind of feel this way and they're not unpacking it. It's kind of hushed at the table. They're like, we can't, enough of this. It's too traumatic to talk about. And I think maybe if they did more talking, there would be some healing in that. But also it is a horror film. So, you know, the horror is going to happen at the end of the day.
Yeah, for me, I also got the notion that, you know, you just can't control what family you're brought into. I mean, there are so many times in life where there are kids, you know, who are born into families, and maybe this family, like, there's a genetic disease. Like, maybe this family, there's diabetes that runs through the family, or maybe there's alcoholism. Matter of fact, for me, the one thing that my grandmother, when she was alive, that she was fearful about when I was growing up was that I was going to become an alcoholic, because on her side of the family, her family tree was full of people who abuse alcohol, and she was worried about that for me. And like, thankfully, I didn't end up on that side of the coin, but there's people who come up and they ended up winning the genetic lottery, so to speak, and they end up getting these inherited diseases, or they end up getting these inherited conditions that affect, you know, their mental health, and it's something that they can't control. But from the outside, people look at you and they judge you for having those things, but they don't understand that it's something that was going to happen. You couldn't control it. And I think in this film, eventually what happens to this whole family is something that they couldn't control. Like from the beginning of the film, as I watched it and rewatched it and I put everything together, it felt like that this was something that was going to happen no matter what they tried to do. And it also speaks to the fact about being in a family and hereditary diseases and things that are passed down. There's nothing that you can really do about it. Like, you can do all the right things, you can make all the good choices, you can be a good person, but sometimes life throws you those curveballs and there's nothing you can really do about it. And it's kind of like you're just a train headed to your fate and there's no brakes to stop it.
I saw this really great, I don't even know if it was really great TikTok. It was a TikTok and I don't remember who it was, but they described themselves as a ball of recessive genes. And I was just like, I feel that. Like, it was like a ball of all the things that you didn't want passed down onto you, and you just live with that now. And I was like, wow, that was a real, I need to start using that. I have a trash body is what I say, but I like ball of recessive genes too. I think that's fun.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Celeste, to your point, I think that, you know, you can take steps to start to prevent some of those things. Like you talked about alcoholism running into your family. And I've talked in the past about addiction running in my family. And, you know, while those aren't, you know, outright something like, oh, cancer, diabetes, or asthma, or, you know, physical sicknesses, those are definitely stuff that play into mental health and mental illness and stuff that can be passed down from generation to generation, because, you know, we watch the generation that comes before us, and sometimes it's all about how you respond. For me, going through a lot of the things that I went through and seeing certain family members turn to certain vices, I was like, I don't want to do this. And now a large portion of what we do with victims is helping people undo addiction from those exact vices. And so it's about taking steps and being practical to kind of undo mental illness that has been, for lack of a better word, passed down to you hereditarily. I don't know if that's a word.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about breaking the cycle. You know, they usually say that many generations of a family, they'll have this like one thing that's held common, that's held the family back for so long, and like usually the next generation, there's hope that they can eventually break the cycle. And I know for me, my grandmother was pretty happy that I was able to break the cycle and not become an alcoholic and not become destitute like my other family members were. And like there's a lot of circumstances and a lot of factors that go into the reasons why they did what they did, but mostly it's because of what they saw. Like Josh said, it's like pretty much when you're a kid, you're soaking everything up in your head because your brain is developing, you know, and you don't exactly know right from wrong. And pretty much your parents and the elders around you are supposed to teach you the right things, but if you're in a family and all they're doing is showing you the wrong things and they don't really care to show you the right things, then what do you expect to grow up to be? Is exactly doing the wrong things. It's going to take somebody from the outside to come in and pull you to see the world in a different light. And I think that is what's plaguing a lot of people who do end up addicted to vices or who lead like, you know, lives that probably they make choices that are criminal or doing illegal activity. It's because they've seen this constantly on a loop growing up for like 10 to 15 years. And so they haven't seen anything different. They haven't seen the world bigger than where they are. And I think the way that we can impact people and not have them lead down those bad paths is that we gotta take these kids out of their environment. We have to show them that the world is bigger than where they come from. We also have to understand that there are factors and circumstances that people can't control. Like you could be born into poverty. Like that wasn't my decision. I was born into it. But you can also show a person like, hey, if you do this and do that, I'm not saying that you could become like Elon Musk rich, but you can at least be somewhat in a better position, you know, if you follow these steps. So
yeah. We can't all benefit from apartheid, you know?
Yes, we can't.
No, that's super real. Like trauma is a very big piece of, I guess, like the protective factors that you can or can't develop if you do not know that there's anything else. It's in a lot of the trauma training and research that I've done just through life and then also through working in education, a lot of it does tie back to you need at least one person in your life that is a protective factor, a stable person who can kind of show you the like you have someone stable and safe in your space, and that can like make a really big difference when you're dealing with heavy amounts of trauma. Like they have that awful test where you take you're like divorced parents, addiction, like you take the little number and it gives you a big number and it's like, all right, this is all the physical illnesses that can be caused by trauma, and then you freak out. But then they go into like all the things that can help you heal from those situations and help you get out of those situations, because trauma not only impacts your day-to-day, but it also impacts your brain and a lot of other things, and it's hard to overcome for sure.
And I think too that's why Annie kind of she goes through as much trauma throughout, you know, following the events and kind of the journey of like discovering all the stuff that her mom was in, because Steve just kind of doesn't seem like a good support system. Like he's like, you know, hey, like my son needs me and I'm going to be a father over a husband right now. And I think that kind of plays into a lot of what you're talking about, Kat, is what we gotta get to see is like her toxicity because of that lack of support and that lack of like one person grows to a point to where it ultimately ends up costing her life. I don't know if we're in spoiler territories or not. So
you totally can.
Yeah, spoiler time.
Our little spoiler thing. I think similar to what Kat was saying, right, is that she also like blocks herself off. Like she's trying to be like, that's the past. I got out of it. It's different. I'm exempt. And not acknowledging the fears that she has. Even so much as like when she has that dream where she admits to trying to not have her child because of those fears. Like that is something that she's pushed deep down and she wouldn't say outwardly, but it's something that she's grappling with all on her own on this little island. And I think despite what this film might be trying to tell us sometimes, that it isn't hopeless, that if, you know, especially what we saw in the other films that we covered too, is that like in exploring like the people who created it and people who experience those things, is that, you know, it's not the end of the world to have schizophrenia or to suffer from delusions or to have mental illnesses that do that, or to inherit those ones, right? Like especially if you're expecting it, then you can kind of get in front of that and already start to kind of work and build and figure out what works for you, understanding that it's not always Western medicine. Like maybe it's yoga, maybe it's spirituality, maybe it's something that grounds you, and then you can pass that on to your kids. Like you can still have kids, it's just like now you have made the steps to live with this and not, you know, kind of throw in the towel like, oh, I'm broken, so that's the end of that. It's like,
we
no,
just don't talk about it. This is a
Yeah.
don't talk about it household. We're just all going to sit here silently and in a
Yes.
ball of stress, and then to get decapitated at some point. 'Cause that's the
Everybody
message that
loses
Ari
their
Aster
heads.
is trying to send.
'Cause everyone loses their heads.
Decapitation is inevitable.
She never catches a break. She never catches. I was like, when we first started watching it, I was like, Kat, remember when her husband just gets set on fire? And like literally, the movie was opening. I was remember her husband just like on fire. Like she just could never win.
Nope.
I you know, similarly to you, all come from a family that has a plethora of different obstacles, from addiction to alcoholism to diabetes and mental illness. Like it's a whole, like you said, all the
whole ball
recessive
of
genes, a big ball for me. And it is always looming. And I also come from a family that is very much like you don't air out your dirty secrets and you keep everything together. You don't go to the doctor or like a therapist and tell them your stuff. Like if you're sad, you just get over it kind of thing. And that has not proven to be effective way of dealing with those illnesses or any of those situations, and has only caused more harm. And so seeing that, like you were saying, Celeste, has for me and like my cousins or similar age group have looked at, you know, our parents or like, you know, aunts, uncles, what have you, and have been like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to, you know, actively work towards a better future where we're not doing that. And then we can show our kids that, like, that's the wrong way you do it. This is the way you can do it and how you can live with it. But it can be really, really scary. I think, you know, with this whole series, every time it's just that fear of like, what if I am also this and what I'm seeing isn't real? And with the ending of this, it's like, you were right. This is the one time where we can't say you're crazy because there's a cult. Because Ari Aster's be like, white people always be in cults. Right? And he's like, you're not wrong. But also, you're not right either, you know? And so this one time, it was correct, the delusions and the fear. And that. Whereas
I think
usually it's
outside of
like,
a horror
seek
movie,
some
it would have
help.
been fun.
Right? It's like, usually if you're suspecting that, you know, your house is haunted and there's
That your
you know,
mom's
cults
in your
and a big
attic
conspiracy
filled
then
with
maybe
flies.
it's time for some help. Yeah. It's time for some help. Or just leave. I don't know why
probably not
everyone
real.
came back to this house. Why do you keep coming back to this house? You pick up the kid after he smashed his nose, you go to a hotel. And we call mom and
Yeah.
say, sorry, figure it out. And we'll be back later.
Or you tell mom to come to the hotel too. I don't know. You just did not need to stay in the house. I think that is something that a lot of horror movies do wrong. I don't even care if you got to sleep outside. Sleep somewhere that is not in that house that is clearly filled with dead things, ghosts, or cultists. Like,
Yeah. Steve ain't got no friends.
but it wouldn't be a movie if this
Yeah.
did not happen. So
Yeah, it's like I saw the old version of the Amityville Horror a couple of weeks ago, and like the whole film, I was just screaming at the family like, just move away from the house. Like but you know, at a point, like you said, there is no film if people don't make bad decisions. So,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, do we really want to open this can of worms right now?
hey, let's open it. We're already
More
here.
money.
Because it's like the Conjuring says, like, you can leave, but
But it'll follow you.
they're gonna follow you. I mean,
that's
So-
Except for
true.
Amityville. There's no money for Ed and Lorraine Warren if you leave the house. You know?
True,
There's no
true.
money for
Yeah.
the demonologist if you leave the house. There's no excuse. You know, there's no book deal.
/ future
If
movie
you stay.
universe.
Yeah, there's no
Yeah.
James Wan cinematic universe if you stay in the house. Yeah. Exactly. Yes. Is it good?
Now, I wanted to go back to the dinner table conversation that's in the film, because I think it really spots like exactly the reason why, you know, when we have things that are eating us up inside, such as problems, like, it is very important to have communication. It's very important to have somebody to talk to. Like, I know for people, when they see that blow up that Toni Collette has, like, they're kind of like in fear. But me, I was clapping because I was like, yeah, she's finally letting out what she's been holding in the whole time. And I also love that the son Peter is also getting a chance to say what he really feels as well. And even though it may hurt, it may be brutal, and it may not be something you may not like to hear, it's always good to alleviate you of that stress and that hesitation, because it doesn't do good just to keep problems just hidden inside you.
First off, that Toni Collette scene was like bringing back memories, because that was my mom. Just want to throw that out there. My mom was not abusive at all, but if I ever like cursed at her or raised my voice,
yeah, I am your mother.
Yes,
yeah,
I am
yeah,
your mother.
I was like, Mom,
same.
Mom, are you here?
I wasn't afraid of my dad. I was afraid of my mom.
Yes, as you should.
Mom energy is different.
To your point, Celeste, that dinner table scene, you know, if you're kind of bottling everything up, because you can kind of see there's just shots of both Peter and Annie just kind of like struggling just to like in that silence and that uncomfortable moment where they're just kind of like pushing around the veggies, like maybe playing with the food a little bit, taking it back to, you know, pre-K, you know, that's what you do. But then that eventually manifest to the argument that you're talking about, and eventually that is the result if you keep it in. Like, if you don't address your feelings, or if you don't have that one person that you can communicate with in a healthy way, and you're like, oh, I'll just bottle it up, I'll talk to them, you know, next week or whatever, it's eventually going to spill out in that capacity. And then you're going to say things a lot more violently and a lot more hopelessly than you ever originally intended to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely really felt for Peter, like that whole, because it's like,
poor baby.
like how do you walk into that house knowing that what they think of you, right? And like knowing what they're expecting of you, what they're not saying, but they definitely are feeling, and having that his whole life, like the fact that she, you know, admits that, you know, she had the paint thinner and all of that, like his entire life he has felt unwanted and has to live with that. And so him sitting at that table and seeing her and knowing what she's thinking, and she's not saying it because she's not the person to say it because she keeps it all down, for him to be like, no, just say it. Just tell me what it is so I can hear it for once and for all. So I'm not just stewing in my own head of what you're thinking. Just do it. And now it's all out in the open. We can be honest with each other. And like every minute I felt for Peter. Like it was just like, he just cannot, like she has a lot of stuff that's going through, but he really is like top victim of this entire thing, because he hasn't even gotten to live, and he never had a chance. And if anything, we're seeing like if he did live on, spoilers, probably would have, replicated similar actions that his mom did, because that was probably her, like, living too, was like her brother dying, her father dying, and her having to look at her mom across the table and being like, what are you doing and why? You're supposed to be the anchor, and not, so it just like keeps on going, because nobody knows how to talk to each other.
And there's even a point too in the movie where she comes in and tells Peter that she never wanted to be a mother. She tried to take an abortion. The abortion just didn't take. And I mean, that's a really heavy scene to watch and endure. Mm-hmm. I mean, Arthur has some like really uncomfortable moments in this film. But that is one of the most uncomfortable things to just be a fly on the wall for, where you're like, wow, like this is a mother disowning her son just because she didn't want to be a mom in the first place. Mm-hmm.
Because of those fears. And he's like sobbing, because he's just like, why? And just like, you didn't want what? Like, and of course, thankfully, that is what I believe was a dream. I think that was a sleepwalk dream.
Yeah,
I don't think he actually heard that. Because I was like, oh my God. Like, it's bad enough. He already does not want to be here, I promise. Trust me, we're all feeling the same way. We all wish we were dead. Not by beheading. Like, I think we all want to do it a normal way. But yeah, I think that and even just like the paint thinner situation too, because that's, you know, a form of abortion too. It's just like, it was like subtle, and then it was not subtle anymore. It was like, no, just right on. Like, Ari Aster does that really well, where it's just like, I'm gonna hard hit and then also do some soft hits, and really like, you can't ever like breathe when it comes to him. And that's like, I do appreciate that kind of form of just adrenaline rush horror.
Yeah, he does the tension building very well.
Yeah, he uses silence, ambient noises. Like, it's a great score in this film, but I admire the scenes where, like, there are characters walking in the house and there's nothing but silence, and you're just hearing the footsteps, and you're hearing dogs barking outside or just nature outside, and then you just don't know what's coming around the corner. But like, the great thing about this film is that it's not the usual, like, oh, a jump scare is about to come, or oh yeah, this is going to jump right out of the door. No, it's all very subtle. Like, it took me a rewatch to even notice that Toni Collette was up on the ceiling during the last half of the film. I didn't spot her once at all. And then on the rewatch, I was like, oh my God, she's been up there the whole time.
I straight up cackled when I saw her. I was like, no, shut up.
I was like, they got her.
Right now. And then she like scurries out. And I lost it. I was like, I was in so much fear, and then that happened, and it was a great, like, oh my God, what, like, humor moment.
That, I think, one of the scenes that I really, really appreciated, and it's I'd say my all-time favorite scene that, like, Ari Aster could ever do, and it was the decision that after Peter comes home from the incident, and he's laying in the bed, and then you hear, like, it's the morning, and you hear Annie leave, and she goes out to the car, and we never leave Peter's face, and he is just out of it, because he, what would you do, right? Yeah. And he's out, and you just hear her, and then it cuts to just, like, her in that scream. But you hear that scream, because it's, like, that build-up, because she's walking, and she's, like, you know, oh, have a nice day, honey, love you. Like, because who's going to imagine this?
And then we walks out,
and just,
we saw.
Yeah, and that whole time you just hear her, and she's outside, and there is a good amount of time that passes before she realizes what happened, and then you hear it, and it's just, like, because the whole time as a viewer, you're just, like, what just happened? What did I just experience? And I will say that, like, Ari really does a good job of getting that that completely destroyed emotional scream. Because, like, Danny has that in Midsommar after her family. Like, that, like, visceral, just, like, the world has ended. I just want to die. And I even said to Kat, I was like, I think that Danny even says, I just want to die, the same way that Annie had said that.
Tony does, yeah.
And so, because I was like, I resonate with that scream. Like, I've felt that before. Like, when you lose someone, like, when you shouldn't, right? Like, you have that same pain. And I feel like he really, like, one is the actors that he chooses. Toni Collette deserved a million awards for this film and more for anything she does. But I really feel like that hit me as a viewer, and lover of horror was like, he really did grab that, very unique experience of someone who lost someone that or a child.
I would say, it does grief very well.
Yeah, the authenticity is strong, because I've been in situations in my life where I've been in a room and I've seen somebody get some bad news akin to that, and I've seen those primal screams. So for me, watching Hereditary, even watching the beginning of Midsommar, it was uncomfortable for me, because, like, I could feel the pain, I could feel the trauma, I could feel the sadness and the anger. In other films, when you see people have grief, you'll see the music, the piano will start playing, and then you'll see the one tear start falling down, and then people will start crying, and it's like a silent, it's like a PG cry, you know? These are like R-rated screams right here. This is like,
unrated.
Yes, unrated screams. Better yet, unrated.
The authenticity is, it's there.
And I think the whole thing, too, I think it all felt very honest. Like, as absurd as the premise is, like, right? And absurd as the last act is, it felt like all building up to that felt really real. And even like Annie, like, freaking out with after the seance, like, that feels so real. Like, she's so phenomenal job. Again, so many awards. She was robbed.